Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Make It Smart Hub Lean Construction webinar delivered by the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre. Hello, my name is John Maclennan, and I'm a project manager with the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre based in Inverness, covering the Highlands and Islands and the northeast of Scotland. This webinar is the 8th in the online series for the Make It Smart Hub, a place where those working in construction and manufacturing can explore, learn and connect with the latest ideas, technologies, processes, skills and other resources to be future ready. You can access the hub at mis-hub.com, and I encourage all those in the webinar today to register on the platform to gain access to free to use resources, connecting the Highlands and Islands community with up-to-date training, equipment and business opportunities. Just a few moments on housekeeping. Before we get underway today, I'd like to highlight some housekeeping points to help with the webinar run as smoothly as possible. Firstly, the session is being recorded today, and the presentations will be available following the conclusion of the webinar. All applicants will be on, or participants will be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but I do encourage you to ask questions throughout using the chat function. We'll try and answer as many questions during the Q&A at the end. There will be interactive polls displayed on your screen, and between each of the segments today, please answer them and we can display the results for everyone to see during the webinar. This will also help inform the direction of travel for the future programme. In the background, we have Danielle, who will make sure everything runs smoothly. I just want to briefly introduce you to the CSIC, what it does to drive forward innovation in the construction sector. Seems to be a slight issue. Show screen.
You can see your screen, John. I'll just take it off and do it again. It might just be stuck.
Yeah, I can't see it. I can only see myself, Danielle. I can't see the actual presentation.
Okay. Okay, that should be with you now. We can see your first slide.
You can't see the first slide. Unfortunately, I can't. So I don't know quite how I'm going to do this, other than I probably know what it says. So I'll just talk to it, Danielle, unless you want to, unless you can move the slide. I'll just talk to it. So the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre is one of 7 innovation centres in Scotland, each with its own thematic sector to work with. We are funded by the Scottish Government, the Scottish Funding Council, Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We work with our key role is to work with industry, academia, and join these two groups of people together to drive forward innovation. We deliver 4 key themes: digital transformation, accelerating modern methods of construction, culture change, and digital technology. The Make It Smart Hub is a light version of the innovation factory we have in Hamilton. The idea was to bring the innovation success that we delivered in the factory to the Highlands and Islands. At the moment, that is an online delivery for obvious reasons because of the COVID pandemic, but our ultimate aim is to bring equipment and do demonstrations and workshops in the Highlands and Islands. We can finish the presentation if it's on screen there, and I'll just go on to talk a wee bit about today's theme. The adoption of lean approach in construction and manufacturing can help us to reduce waste and maximise value. The bulk of UK's overall waste mountain is not waste from households. The construction, demolition and excavation waste streams are some of the biggest and fastest growing in the UK and overseas. Waste from home accounts for around 14% of the annual national waste footprint, the same proportion as waste from commercial properties and projects. Waste from construction, demolition and excavations, meanwhile, account for some 59% of waste arisings. Over the past 10 years, over 330,000 new homes have been built in the UK, so it's not unsurprising that the construction industry uses 400 million tonnes of natural resources each year, 60% of all materials usage in the UK. And it is critical that the industry employs a circular economy principle aimed at eliminating waste and the continued use of resources. It is impossible for the construction sector to operate without producing any waste, but it is possible to limit the amount that ends up in landfill. All companies are legally required to reduce, reuse, and recycle before disposal. Briefly, just looking at the textile sector, industries that depend on textiles like fashion and homewares have been accelerating production and scaling up hard to recycle material blends at rates that have outpaced the development of reuse systems and recycling technologies. According to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, only 1% of textiles produced each year for fashion are successfully recycled in true closed-loop fashion. 73% of waste textiles are burned or sent to landfill. As construction and manufacturing businesses move towards more circular ways of working, this webinar will explore the benefits of waste reduction in design and built environment settings. The webinar will cover topics such as design for waste efficient procurement, design for materials optimization, design for off-site construction, design for reuse and recovery, design for deconstruction and flexibility. Joining me today will be Stephen Boyle, Programme Manager of Construction at Zero Waste Scotland, John Logan, Group Environmental Manager at McLaughlin and Harvey Limited, and Robert Greene, Technical Director at Levenseat Limited. Hopefully we will have one spotlight session for an early stage businesses later on in the webinar. But I would just like now to hand over to Stephen Boyle of Zero Waste Scotland. Stephen.
Thank you, John. Hi. I'm just going to grab the screen for everyone and share my presentation. You should be able to see that now.
It's not up yet on our screen. We're just looking at your desktop screen, Stephen.
Okay. I'll start it again. How's that?
Yep.
Can you see it?
Nope, it looks like it's minimised at the bottom.
Ha, let me go. Always typical little problems. It worked very well earlier on. Can you see me?
We can see you, yes.
Okay. That's the important thing.
There you are, and then, yeah, perfect. That's it coming up now. Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
No, sorry about that, everyone. So, yeah, so I'm Stephen Boyle. I'm head up the construction programme at Zero Waste Scotland. Now, John has actually gone through a number of little points about resource efficiency and the circular economy, which is indeed fundamental to driving forward this whole agenda about consumption. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today, about consumption and how it's important for our economy and for our environment. So a tiny little bit about Zero Waste Scotland. Zero Waste Scotland is a fully funded Scottish Government organisation. We are the Scottish Government's resource and circular economy experts, and we're here to help drive and support resource minimisation and promotion of the circular economy. Again, some of the facts and figures about waste in Scotland. John's mentioned a couple for the UK, but from a Scotland perspective, the construction sector is incredibly important. It's about 10% of our GDP, 10% of our workforce. But again, the Scottish figures, we generate about 50% of all of the waste produced per year in Scotland, and about 50%, we use about 50% of all resources. Now, let's talk about resources. Let's talk about the consumption of resources. About a year or so ago, CSIC did a report on consumption in Scotland, and it showed that Scotland was currently using or consuming 3 planets worth of resources per year. And that is unsustainable, particularly as we are as other nations were consuming similar amounts, and as the developing nations begin to grow and begin to live in a similar level as we are, they were also approaching this. So we need to take action. We need to take action to reduce our consumption. And there's a number of economic and environmental reasons for doing that. Let's talk about economics. Now, we are in a very difficult period just now for materials. There is a great push for building out of the pandemic, and so there's a big pull on resources across the world. And as the developing nations are growing, as I mentioned before, there's a great deal of markets for these materials. And as Scotland is a net importer of materials for the construction sector, we import more construction materials than we export, then we are ourselves very, very susceptible to international volatility in the market. And as you can see from this one example, the market is incredibly high at the moment for the cost of materials. And this is creating a number of issues and has a number of impacts on the work that we do, including the delay in projects and the increasing costs. So from an economic perspective, then the materials that we use and consume is an important thing that we need to address, need to manage, and need to look at how we can be more efficient in our use of them. But again, a point that John made there about the consumption of materials and the scale of the construction over the domestic side of it. This is from Consider It Construction. It's just one little fact about the industry. We hear an awful lot about the consumption of and the production of packaging waste within our homes, but the construction sector generates 3 times more packaging waste than all domestic sources. And we don't hear an awful lot about that, but we as an industry know this. About a year or so ago, we've come up with a methodology for measuring an 8-yard skip like this and what the impacts and what was in it in a tip site. Now, unfortunately, the pandemic happened, so we haven't got an awful lot of examples to show you, but I'll just show you one example. And this is an example from a housing estate in Glasgow. And this gives you an idea of the condition, the sources, the volumes, and the reasons why waste is found in skips on site. There was around about 8 buildings being fitted out with insulation, plasterboard and wiring and things at the time of this day's survey of this 8-yard skip. But you can see within there that it's not just about the cost of the skip, it's actually the cost of the materials and the labour that go into the skip. And this showed that on the day of the survey, the cost of the materials in the skip was £2,400 and not the £200 for the actual hire of it. And that's a major impact on your bottom line of any construction process and business and the work that you do. Again, looking at some of the figures, there's some things to pull out there. Yes, 30% of it was packaging waste, but look at the middle graph there. 33%, or 34% I should say, came from cutting waste. Now, cutting waste can be actually designed out of this, the work that we do. Off-site construction, modern methods of construction can drastically reduce that third of the waste within that skip. So modern methods of construction and thinking about things and designing things circularly can help and support resource efficiency within this area. On the right-hand graph, just throw in there that 4% of the materials in there were brand new, and how they managed back into the skip. It's a problem we need to do. So good site waste management is also very, very important here. There's lots of drivers. There's waste regulations, of course, but for other things, we have the climate change, making things last, which is a circular economy process strategy. Sorry. But I'm going to talk a lot about materials now and resources from an environmental perspective. Now, why is waste? Why are the resources that we use within a building so important, especially as we move towards addressing the climate emergency and in reaching net zero carbon? Well, quite simply, we all know that the built environment in Scotland generates and is about 40% of our carbon footprint. But of that 40%, 20 to 70% is in the embodied carbon. That's the carbon within the materials that we use to build and construct buildings, and also in the materials that we then use for the maintenance of the building throughout its life, or for any retrofit or refurbishment throughout its life. And that fraction is becoming more and more important as we decarbonize our electricity grid and move away from fossil fuel for heating. And you can see here the orange section is growing within our buildings. That's a very recent one from RIBA, showing the actual significance of embodied carbon over a whole life carbon of a building. And that's the embodied carbon within the materials. And as we move to a net zero carbon, it's not just the energy and the heat that we need to get to net zero, it's the materials themselves. And that means two things. One, we use sustainable materials like wood, which sequestrate carbon, that is, they have a negative carbon footprint, but that we also reuse the materials, recycled materials and remanufactured materials in our new buildings. That means the buildings that we have now will be the material banks for the future. So we need to retain those materials, we have to recover those materials, repurpose them and put them back into our buildings if we have to deliver net zero, wherever that target may be it 2030 for Glasgow or 2045 for Scotland. This one is just a little diagram showing where reused sustainable materials sit within the hierarchy of embodied carbon. And you can see right at the top, you get metal products like aluminium and steel, and fossil fuel ones. Now we at Zero Waste Scotland believe that you can drive lean construction, resource efficiency, address things like resource market unsustainability, can't actually say it, well, but hit our environmental goals and reach net zero through the introduction of circular economy principles. And that's the design out waste, design for adaptability, design for deconstruction that John mentioned earlier. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about them and about the work that Zero Waste Scotland does, and to see some of the tools and guidance that we produce, I'd just like to point you towards our website. Go on, have a little look, have a little read, get in touch with us if you've any questions. But thank you very much, and I'll hand over to John again to introduce your next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's very informative. And the links to the website will be shared later on. I'd like to now hand over to John Logan. That's right, am I? Yes, John Logan and McLaughlin and Harvey. John, over to you.
Thank you, John. I think Danielle was looking for you to take a poll before I come on. However, can everyone see my screen, Danielle?
Well, will we take the poll, John?
It's up to you, John. It's your show.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go, Danielle. If you can put up the first poll, we'll just take that just now. So which of the following would help reduce waste the most, in your opinion? A few more seconds. Okay, and there are the results. By far in the lead, which of the following would help reduce waste the most? Plan ahead to waste less. Okay, thank you. Now, we'll hand over to John properly this time. Over to you.
Thank you, John. I'll just see my screen here. Okay, thank you for the invitation to speak today, John. I've taken a slightly different slant on today's presentation, and it ties in with Stephen's comments on how construction waste is made up and on the different aspects contributing to it. Back in the 60s, a gentleman called Taiichi Ono developed the Toyota lean production system, which, although primarily relates to the automotive industry, I think there are a lot of synergies within construction. So I've taken a slant on each of them, and I'd like to share those with you today. So the first one really is the waste of inventory. or procurement. Procurement obviously is a big aspect of everything we do as an industry. And inventory costs you money. Until it's installed and paid for, those materials and that equipment are yours. In addition to the direct costs of both, there remains the risk of indirect costs associated with storage, space requirements, packaging, transport, and most likely damage. The waste of inventory masks the risk of other wasteful activities in your construction process. And while just-in-time deliveries are a utopia in terms of construction, and normally a just-in-case ideology normally means that procurement leads to the ordering of materials. The second aspect is the waste of time. Now, time is money. It's an old cliche, but it's ever more prevalent in this day when time is the one commodity that nobody has a surplus of. So why do so many of our operations as an industry rely on others? Whether it's material deliveries, waiting on design clarifications, plants being repaired, accident downtime or excess travel times, we spend a lot of our time a lot of our working lives waiting on time from others in terms of responses. This is an obvious waste which has negative impacts on the construction process, and the waste disrupts programme and therefore flow, meaning that there's increased stress levels in a system which is already time bound. So the real difference that can make is a major impact on programme, and that's probably the most serious of all the wastes and the 7 aspects that we'll look at today. The potentially significant major commercial impact on companies from failing to meet contractual deliverables in terms of handing over on time can lead to liquidated damages clauses being activated. So as well as the additional overhead costs, the underproduction as a result of many factors, such as long material lead times, commodity demand, which Stephen touched on, which is really a pressure on the industry just now, poor supplier relations, and obviously the good old Scottish weather, to name a few. These issues cause a significant desire to try and recover from that loss of time. However, when you try to do that, you can actually you can affect the delicate equilibrium in an even more negative way, and that's by basically trying to recover through the waste of overproduction. It's not as simple as just dedicating more resources in terms of manpower or time or money to the process. And if it's not managed properly, that can actually lead to additional wasted time and procurement, and more materials being wasted. There's also the additional cost of that resource relating to overhead and prelim costs when the project may already be sweating commercially. And it also means commonly that the physical production of wasted materials and subsequent over-procurement of materials to try and recover again with the ill-considered direct costs. So we're really getting into a perfect storm between loss of programme and trying to recover. The most obvious one in the industry is waste as a result of defects, and it should be the easiest in terms of identification and elimination before they're identified by your customers. Defects in quality inevitably cost more money than expected to rectify through rework and replacement, wasted materials, and ultimately a wasted reputation via dissatisfied customers. Now, Stephen mentioned the old cliche earlier of measure twice, cut once. Which is ever more apt in an environment which is stressed with the waste of time and overproduction. Every construction company and every responsible business will have a quality management system. However, lessons learned doesn't always mean lessons heeded. At the heart of many quality systems is the mantra of plan, do, check, act. Yet the sort of repeated waste production patterns that we see across multiple projects are reflected in a similar mechanism where plan, try, fail and repeat is exercised. So behaviours and cultures at the heart of all these sort of mantras within the construction industry, as well as the industry required level for change, like everything else, must be driven from within each company and more so from within the industry. The construction industry is driven a high percentage of GDP, between sort of 6 and 10% over the last years, including the variables on COVID, but we still produced over 60 million tonnes of waste annually. And the waste hierarchy is no surprise anymore. And right at the start of it is, the principles of trying to eliminate waste. But as an industry, we've done very little to actually try and facilitate that over the last decade. Right at the heart of it, and it's a personal opinion here, is, you know, in construction, resource efficiency is often regarded as a symptom of environmentalism, whereas driving efficiencies in water use, energy consumption and waste production are commonly overlooked. I think disregarding the fact that so much time and money can be saved by actually listening to people who have new ideas or new approaches to how we minimise waste is something that the industry really needs to change. You know, we still operate very much in a command and control culture within the construction industry, which can stifle a lot of innovation and ideas. And that's something that I think we have to change within the next 3 to 5 years if we're going to make any significant inroads into reducing construction waste. Now, modern methods of construction is something that we've had mixed success with, and I've got a couple of examples of some projects on the screen here. The image on the right-hand side is a new hotel development which we recently completed in Edinburgh for Moxie, which was a great success in terms of off-site manufacture. Basically, once the structural steel in the facade, the structural steel was constructed and the facade was on, the rooms in the hotel actually came as completed modules. So without oversimplifying things, it was essentially plug and play, where once the plumbing and the electrics was connected, they were essentially good to go. And that really helped us in terms of keeping on programme. And because we were able to procure the rooms early, it meant that we had consistency of supply, so it meant that production levels were still high, even when the weather, for example, was unfavourable. On a sort of more local context to the Highlands and Islands, the image on the left-hand side is one of the early stage images from a new care home that we're just about to hand over in Goat Hill in Stornoway, where we had looked at possible off-site manufacturing capabilities at the start of the project, and very quickly it became, you know, it wasn't going to work for that particular project because of the geography and because of the capability on the island. And for us to make off-site manufacture credible for the project in terms of providing a significant contribution to the materials and the programme, we would have actually had to have chartered a ferry for 7 months to bring the materials to site. And that would have had an obvious, fairly significant knock-on commercial implication for the client. So before we look at things like modern methods of construction, we have to take into account the local viability of the supply chain and the local market and even the local demographics of the project that we're working on. So it's not a simple one-size-fits-all when it comes to MMC. And of late, we've tried to really drive the resource agenda within the company. So we have produced some fairly detailed internal management guidance for project teams and for estimators, etc., mainly on waste management, because of the significant risks that can come from that, both in a commercial cost and indeed a regulatory circumstance if we get things wrong or our subcontractors get things wrong. But a big passion of mine and the business and our civil engineering section is that we're really trying to drive the promotion of recycled aggregates. And we're big advocates of it, and I'm keen to learn more about how we can change this within the industry in terms of the percentage of materials which are manufactured. And I think a lot of that has to be driven by changes in clients' aspirations to have recycled materials used on civil engineering projects, for example, and indeed the willingness to challenge designers in terms of their adherence to things like specification for highways works. A lot of the recycled aggregates more than meet the technical specifications that are required for those projects. So really overlooking them is nothing more than a sort of risk-averse approach to professional indemnity insurance and that kind of thing. And I think those conventions need challenged. So thank you for your time and attention today. And if there are any questions that come up in relation to any of the 7 aspects, please feel free just to let me know. Thank you. I'll hand back to John.
Thank you, John. That was a great insight around the 7 aspects of the waste chain. Very interesting point about the more you waste, the more you procure in order to make up for that waste. It's maybe evident but not obvious. And I absolutely am an advocate of modern methods of construction and off-site construction in Scotland. It would be really good if that was in Scotland as well, not just delivered in Scotland. So I'd just like to introduce the next speaker, which is Robert Greene of Levenseat. Robert.
Thanks, John. So thanks for having us today. My name is Robert Greene. I'm the Technical Director for Levenseat. We're a key player in the Scottish waste resource and waste management sector. We've been in operation for over 35 years. In the sort of more recent times, we've started to invest quite significantly in resource recovery, mineral recovery, and moving away from landfill in general. As a business, we've invested tens of millions of pounds in first of the kind processes in Scotland as an SME, from clean material recycling facilities through to extracting high calorific fuel from your garden and green waste, to fuel preparation for gasification as well. So from that, we've gained quite a bit of experience in resource recovery and dealing with some of the more difficult waste streams, and we turned our focus on to mineral recovery, sand, aggregates, etc. And through that, we developed and built our own wash plant, which extracts all the sand and aggregates from street sweepings, gully waste, fines processing, energy from waste, fuel preparation. We extract those aggregates, we wash the wash water, treat the wash water, reuse that water in a closed loop circuit. And more recently, through that investment, and sorry, I should have said we've invested about £2 million in that process plant. We have an application into Scottish Enterprise at the moment for a further upgrade on medium density separation, which will hopefully give us a plus mil aggregate as well. And earlier this year, we undertook a campaign with FCC where we processed 32,000 tonnes of their incinerated bottom ash aggregates from their Miller Hill energy from waste plant. And we undertook quite a lot of R&D work on those aggregates, and about 2 months ago we were formally awarded end of waste on those aggregates, which is a 4 mil sand, 10 to 25 mil, and a 0 to 10 mil aggregate that can also be blended and used as a ballast. And we also have a 6F5 from our construction demolition waste as well. So true to form, and trying to get industry and market and Scottish construction industry to take up some of these aggregates, we actually put these aggregates into our own precast concrete product as well. So we can actually offer to the market a sustainable concrete precast block that can be used for temporary structures, can be used for static processing plant, etc. as well, and they are made from 100% recycled aggregates. We also have, sorry, I've got to move a few things here. We have a few other projects on way, which I've lost. Bear with us, guys. So we've also currently developed PFA replacement for the construction industry, and we've achieved end of waste on sands from street sweepings and gully waste. And these sands have achieved the BSEN accreditation and formal end of waste from SEPA as a builder sand. They can be used without limitation under that BSEN accreditation. We're also developing a geopolymer cement glass, sands and aggregates from other waste streams as well. We're about to, as I mentioned before, we've spent £2 million on our wash plant. We've planned another £1 million of investment going into that. And we've successfully achieved end of waste on 4 of our products, one of which has led to a patent being granted and a second patent being lodged. So yeah, through some of the processes, some of the benefits are recovering the precious metals, especially from the IBA. When we processed about 32,000 tonnes of IBA earlier this year, that recovered about 800 to 900 tonnes of precious metals, rare earth metals, etc. It also reduces our reliance on natural resources and reduces the carbon footprint or embodied carbon footprint, potentially going into construction if we can use some of these recycled end of waste aggregates that meet the technical specifications. We talk about partnerships and approaches, and we do believe strongly in collaboration. The projects where we have achieved end of waste and our BSEN standards have been projects where from the outset we've involved Scottish Enterprise, Zero Waste Scotland and Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, and through Construction Scotland we've also collaborated with the University of Dundee and Strathclyde University. So we've got a good model, a good template that works, has worked on real projects and has successfully achieved end of waste as a direct result. Danielle, if I can hand over to you to explain how end of waste is achieved, please.
End of waste criteria specify when material ceases to be classified as a waste and can officially be defined as a product or secondary raw material. To receive end of waste status, you must first identify non-waste comparator. This cannot be a newly invented product. It must be a product which exists on the market and is able to be utilised. Identify standards of the non-waste comparator in both technical and environmental performance. Produce sample material for analysis. Analyse to required British standards for technical specification and WAC analysis for environmental specification, plus additional analysis which could be requested by industry or SEPA. To satisfy end of waste criteria, you must produce factory control systems. The system dictates the procedure for processing material to produce product which continually meets specification. This includes waste acceptance criteria, process description, process review procedure and timeline, documentation on incoming waste streams, sampling, analysis, material handling and storage procedures, testing equipment, manufacturing equipment, plant adjustments to ensure product conformity, product traceability. Once complete, submit to SEPA for approval of end of waste status. Once approved, you must implement the factory control system to ensure continual analysis and monitoring of environmental and technical specification. The end of waste process ensures and proves that Levenseat are delivering to the market a high quality secondary aggregate that consistently matches the standard of a virgin aggregate.
Thanks, Danielle. So having successfully achieved end of waste on some of these aggregates that we're currently working on, we've done some carbon footprint savings on embodied carbon for virgin aggregates. And typically, while not on their own, they have a huge saving. When you look at incinerator bottom ash aggregates as an example, as an industry, we produce about 2.7 million tonnes. So if we can be processing these and achieving end of waste as an industry, then they start to have a very significant carbon saving. A PFA replacement, which we go into construction this year and hope to be operational for December next year, and that has a very decent or significant carbon saving by offsetting cement and natural resources used in concrete. One project we're working on at the moment with Construction Scotland Innovation Centre and University of Dundee is a geopolymer cement made from energy from waste boiler ash. And yeah, assuming you had 100% replacement of OPC, then again you have a fairly significant carbon saving. The reality is it will be a percentage of the OPC, but it will still have quite a significant, decent saving. And we are, I guess, as a waste management company and a resource recovery company, and trying to achieving end of waste and getting these quality protocols in place. We're also dealing with the Scottish Government, CEPA, industry in general as well. And we do see, and it has been quoted, that the work that we are doing is of significant strategic importance to the construction sector, given some of the resource deficiencies we're currently facing, and embodied carbon that is associated with the construction industry as well. So we believe we're leaders in the waste and resource sector. We're developing new products, and we ask that, are you a leader in your industry, and will you work with us to use those products? If I can hand you back to John, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Robert. A very interesting presentation on how to maximise value from 100% recycled products, whilst also benefiting the environment, and great to see such progress being made. Just before we go on to the second poll, I'll just remind those on the webinar today, if they want to ask a question, please click on the questions in the control panel and pop your question in there, and we'll try and get them at the end. But now we'll move on to the second poll. If we could have that on screen, Danielle, thank you. What are the drivers of construction? Just a few more seconds. And there we have the results. Compliance and lower expenditure, clearly in the lead. Okay, so now I'm going to hand over to our next speaker. These are one of the spotlight sessions that I have on the Make It Smart Hub webinar series. It's an opportunity for an early stage business involved in the context of the webinar today to pitch their idea, pitch their business, and maybe make an ask of the audience. So I'd just like to hand over to Danny Campbell of Hoco Design Limited. Danny, you have 2 minutes, and I'm quite strict with the timer, okay? So over to you, Danny.
Hello, hi everyone, thanks for having me. I'll keep this really snappy. I've got to run to this program in a second anyway. So we are the homeowner's architect. The company's called Hoco, and what we've developed is basically a Pablo Escobar approach to home renovations, where we've got this incredible product which is highly designed home extensions and remodels, and we've created this vertical supply chain where we build the projects, we design them, and we also supply them with all the furnishings and interior design products as well. We've managed to scale incredibly fast over the past 2 years, going from 2 staff to now 34, and we're about to expand again into the UK to secure market share, hiring another 30 architects, which will take us to 40. So the way we're impacting the lean construction market is by creating this digital infrastructure, almost like a tech company, but on a very high local level with local architects. So my ask of you would be to follow us as we're about to do this new funding round through crowdfunding, and make contact with me, because we're kind of becoming this quite large architecture firm now, which wasn't my original anticipation. And it'd be great to connect with some of you kind of bigger players who might have a bit more influence and certainly help us distribute our vision for what small scale architecture should be in a circular environment.
Well, great to hear from you, Danny. Thanks very much for that. It's sticking to time as well. You're welcome to stay on the rest of the webinar, see if there's any questions that might come up in the Q&A for you, but if you have to dash, that's absolutely fine. I'd love to see your improvised office.
Great, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the Q&A session for the last 15 minutes. So just to remind everyone to get the questions in. I have got a few on the screen here now that I can ask. So a question for John, not me. What is the general level of focus of waste within the construction sector?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the general consensus from being within the industry is that waste is always someone else's problem. No one ever really takes ownership of it until it goes wrong from a commercial perspective, and then you get the usual project level interrogations as to why we produce so much, and the inevitable bottom line impact that has on the project. As an industry, I touched earlier on the fact that we've produced consistently significant volumes of waste for the last decade, and I think it needs a fundamental change in how we regulate waste in this country and the actual drivers that are behind it, in terms of maybe tax implications. I know everybody talks about high recycling rates. To be honest with you now, the industry takes that almost as a given, that because we have a high recycling rate, we don't look to think that, you know, repurposing or reuse has a degree of significance in how we approach waste, because recycling is deemed as being acceptable. So I think there has to be some kind of fiscal shift towards, you know, we have a waste hierarchy, why not have some kind of taxation hierarchy that relates to how you repurpose or dispose of your materials. But to answer the question, I don't think there's a significant focus on waste at all within the construction industry.
Okay, do you think reclassification of some waste might help shift that focus? What I mean by that is, you know, reclassifying topsoil, you know, as not as waste, or treated timber. You know, is there any reclassifications of waste you think that would help shift that focus?
Well, those are kind of, SEPA, to be fair, have produced excellent guidance on topsoil, you know, and the guidance that's there is very beneficial for the industry. But there's also been some recent position statements kind of come out on the declassification or otherwise of timber that's been treated, and age restrictions and that kind of thing on it. Personally, I don't think declassifying waste materials of any kind would help, to be honest with you, John. I think that would open more loopholes for contractors to utilise. I would actually like to see a strengthening of the regulatory regime in terms of waste management.
Okay, thanks very much, John. We've got another question from the audience. This one's for Stephen. How will embodied carbon of materials drive the reuse of materials in the future? And if I could, it was an interesting point in your presentation, Stephen, where I think at the middle, no, the right-hand side chart, which was for residential, said that 51% of the materials was where the embodied carbon was. So I wonder if in that kind of context, you know, how will embodied carbon of materials drive the reuse in the future?
Yeah, so I mentioned there about if we're going to reach net zero. So the only way to reach net zero is by using sustainable or reused materials, and that's the only way we're going to do it. So how will embodied carbon drive it? It will be the setting of targets within the industry to meet the net zero targets. At the moment, there's recommendations of levels, such as the REBA 600 kilograms per metre squared, and the new Scottish public sector net zero public sector building standard. That's going to go around around about 600 as well. But as we move to understand the embodied carbon of our buildings, those numbers will go down, and the greater that those go down, the more and more will be pushed, and the industry will be pushed to meet those targets, and the only way to do that is by reusing materials. So embodied carbon through targets will drive the use of waste materials within our building stock.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in there, or will I move on to the next question? I'll just move on. So the next audience questions is I'll just read it out. To avoid risk-adverse approaches from designers blocking use of recycled materials or more circular economy approaches, does there have to be penalties for failing to be more waste efficient in the design process? And if so, how would you measure efficiency? Stephen, I think that's kind of for you. If that's all right.
No, I was wondering there. I mean, I would actually challenge the question a little bit and saying that the design, it's not really the design, it's the person who asks the designer to make the building. They have to be very clear in what their own targets and goals are. So be that a public sector or private organisation, as long as they are specific about what they want to achieve from the outset, then the designer should then produce a building to meet their needs. So I would start from that perspective. I think that there's a bit more learning needs to be done on the circular economy and what that actually means for design. And there will need to be some fiscal measures put in place to help and support some of the longer term aspects of circular design. We all know that we should be designing out waste for the construction site. That's what we're talking about today, good site waste management and things. But when we actually start talking to designers about designing buildings to minimise waste generation and resource use for the maintenance of the building throughout its lifetime, then they go, well, why I'm just designing this building? And it's the same for deconstruction as well. So unless I would suggest that we be pushing for things like deconstruction assessments to be done during the design stage of a building to drive some of these measures forward.
So,
sorry, John, to cut across. We're kind of seeing it at there's been a fundamental change in the design process within construction now. A lot of clients are driving the sort of net zero agenda, and where funding, for example, is linked to net zero requirements or embodied carbon requirements for buildings. We're seeing that, you know, the recent SFT document on the standards in public sector buildings is very good. It's an excellent document. I would encourage anyone to read it in driving that agenda. And I think the shift towards net zero is now pushing the circular debate and the reuse of waste materials, etc., along with it. The whole concept of sustainability up until about 18 months ago in construction was like pushing a boulder up a hill. But net zero has changed all of that, because the true sort of sustainability in terms of how all these concepts link are now being driven by clients and you know, public sector organisations in the pursuit of net zero. So there has been a lot of fundamental changes in the last 12 to 18 months within the industry, and we're now seeing that in design through things like, you know, life cycle analysis at design stage, looking at where you deliver net zero, because there's still a lot of debate in the industry about when and where what net zero actually means. And there's too many codes on net zero in the industry. There's so many codes kicking around at the moment that someone's going to have to invent a net zero enigma machine to make sense of all of them. So I think some consistency in terms of approach. I know we're in a Scottish context, but the SFT document is an excellent document on driving the changes that the industry and, you know, organisations like Stevens have been pursuing for the last 5 years. So I do think that things will change radically, and it's no longer just a case of saying, well, you know, we're challenging the design or we're building what's designed. There is a more open forum now for challenging that right at project concept stage.
Okay, excellent. And Stephen, just to follow on from that, do you think that you mentioned fiscal measures? Do you think, in terms of deconstruction, do you think there'll be an incentive through fiscal measures to deconstruction before demolition, and therefore stripping out recyclable materials, and stopping them going to landfill?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as John just said there about the whole net zero agenda, we will need these materials for our new buildings. So if we can understand what's in the building and carry out deconstruction audits to understand the materials in there, we can actually make a financial decision on whether or not it's financially viable for us to remove these for resale. And of course, we need the market there in the first place. So net zero is creating that market, which will then make it more and more appropriate for that deconstruction to happen before demolition.
Okay, so I've just got a question. I think I can address this one to Robert. In terms of, obviously you're in a disruptive sector, Robert, in terms of you're bringing new products to market, new products that in some cases didn't exist beforehand, and non-standard products. So what steps can we take to make reusing materials more feasible?
Yeah, it's a good question, John. I remember when I first started this journey, a gentleman from Scottish Enterprise said, I've been working with someone for 20 years who still doesn't have it on a particular product. So the first thing for us in this particular industry on achieving end of waste is you must have a like-for-like non-waste comparison. So you can't invent something. The construction industry, the waste industry is littered with people who have come up with new concepts, processes, and built a shed, hid the rubbish, and did a runner without actually doing anything. And there's a big shed behind the Lockheed landfill site full of carpet and plasterboard. That's a good example of that. So to achieve end of waste, you must have a non-waste comparison. You then test your product to ensure that it performs the same technical and environmental specification as that non-waste product. So you must prove you've got a non-waste product. You must prove that your product performs to exactly the same specification and environmental requirements. You must prove that you have a local sustainable market, i.e. you've not just invented something and actually there's nothing out there, and you're going to end up building another big stockpile. And you must demonstrate consistency and conformity. So month in, month out, the waste industry changes. It changes on seasonal variances. Street sweepers is classic because it's autumn, it's full of leaves and twigs and everything else. So you must demonstrate week in, week out that your product is the same technical environmental requirements and doesn't change. And then and only then you can pull your package of information together and you submit that to CEPA and say, there you go, we'd like to apply for end of waste. And then you go to people like Stephen and say, Stephen, we want to be on the secondary aggregates directory. We then start to lobby people like John, and more recently we were at Parablo over at Harvey Gate saying, look, it's a BSEN standard. It's not a secondary aggregate. It's not a waste. It's a sand. It's a builder sand, and it can be used the same as that sand. From a risk point, from insurance, from the developers who have to ensure the development, say it will last the life you're claiming it will, to the insurers, to the tenants. They need assurance that that product is a product, and we've done that. And we've got the protocols, we've got the CE markings and the product specification to demonstrate that. So we need industry to embrace this. We're going away from landfill, we're going away from reliance on natural resources. We're trying to reduce carbon footprint, but we can only do it if all the sectors come together and actually genuinely.
Absolutely. Adoption is key, and that requires the whole of the ecosystem to come together in order to make that happen, from policymakers to legal frameworks to public procurement to building standards. All of that needs to come together, pulling together to get towards low carbon. We're at the end of the time, people. So thanks to the audience today for joining and for all those important questions to the panel. Thanks to John, Robert and Stephen and Danny from HOCO for sharing their thoughts and an insightful discussion. We have posted a few details in the relevant links. If you haven't already, please done so. Please download the handouts before exiting. The next webinar in the series is Building Sustainable Energy Efficient Buildings, a date to be confirmed, or it might just be, what do my customers want in terms of low carbon? I haven't quite decided yet. And all who have registered for the webinar today will get an invite for this webinar. The Make It Smart Hub for Construction and Manufacturing SMEs in the Highlands and Islands is part funded by the 2014-2020 European Structural Investment Fund and support from Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Government. It's also gratefully acknowledged. Thank you for all attending this afternoon's webinar. Please complete the feedback form, as we really do appreciate your views. So let's get connected, get solutions focused, and let's build a bright future for the construction and manufacturing sectors. Slán Stay safe.
Thanks, John.